Boston, April 15, 2013. A crystal-clear spring day, overflowing with the roaring cheers and vibrant colors of the world's most prestigious marathon. Sweat dripping on the pavement, radiant smiles at the finish line, and thousands of spectators packed shoulder to shoulder along Boylston Street. The atmosphere was pulsating with life and celebration. But beneath that lively surface, a dark shadow had quietly slithered into the crowd. The clock struck 2:49 p.m. A deafening, dry crack ripped through the air. At first, many simply froze, confused, thinking it was a celebratory cannon. But then, the ground shook. Plumes of thick white smoke billowed up, swallowing the sky. The air was instantly choked with the acrid stench of gunpowder mixed with the metallic smell of blood. 12 seconds later, a second bomb detonated just a block away, extinguishing any lingering hope. The cheers morphed into blood-curdling screams. In the blink of an eye, the proud finish line was reduced to a desolate war zone, scattered with torn flesh and blood-soaked running shoes. Amidst the wailing ambulance sirens and the bodies clinging to life on the sidewalk, law enforcement realized a horrifying truth. The perpetrator had calculated the exact moment of maximum crowding to unleash maximum carnage. But the question that made even the most hardened firefighters shudder as they scanned the chaotic crowd was, were those two bombs the end, or were there more deadly traps ticking away, just waiting to detonate? Before the smoke had even cleared, the largest manhunt in FBI history was triggered. Boylston Street went into strict lockdown, transforming into a massive crime scene. From the pools of blood and debris, forensic experts painstakingly collected the grim jigsaw puzzle of death. Shards of a steel pressure cooker, charred wiring, and thousands of BBS and sharp nails. Shrapnel packed into the bomb with the sole, malicious intent of tearing through human flesh and stealing lives in the most brutal way possible. But who was the phantom behind the carnage? No terrorist organization stepped forward to claim responsibility. The only answers lay scattered across 10 terabytes of digital data, thousands of hours of surveillance footage, and eyewitness cell phone videos. Inside a stiflingly dark command center, hundreds of agents remained glued to their screens, rewinding frames over and over again. They were looking for a ghost moving against the grain. By the third day, a chilling breakthrough emerged. While the entire crowd instinctively turned in horror toward the first explosion, a security camera at Whiskey's Steakhouse caught a figure who didn't even flinch. Wearing a white baseball cap backward, he calmly slipped his heavy backpack onto the ground, right at the feet of an 8-year-old boy. He casually walked away just moments before the second blast ripped through the scene. When technicians zoomed in on suspect White Hat, a collective shiver went down the spines of the investigators. This wasn't a stereotypical battle-hardened terrorist. This cold-blooded killer looked exactly like the college kid next door. Who was he? And the man with him, the one in the black hat with piercing eyes. What sinister secrets was he hiding beneath his heavy jacket? Over 48 hours after the blasts, and the suffocating shadow of a dead end began to loom over the command center. Despite having their faces, the identities of White Hat and Black Hat remained a void. Facing crushing public pressure and the haunting paranoia that a third bomb could detonate at any second, the FBI rolled the dice on a massive gamble, releasing the suspects' photos to national media. "Someone out there knows who they are," declared Special Agent in Charge Richard Deslauriers. Instantly, millions of American eyes were glued to their screens. The greatest digital manhunt in history had begun. However, rattling the cage proved to be a double-edged sword. Seeing their faces plastered across every network didn't make them cower in fear. It triggered a cold-blooded pivot. The darkness of the night on April 18th witnessed a terrifying evolution. From faceless bombers, they stepped into the light to hunt. What triggered this ultimate bloodlust, and what deadly arsenal was hiding under their coats as they stepped out into the night? The MIT campus was dead silent at 10:30 p.m. Young campus police officer Sean Collier was sitting in his cruiser, completely unaware that the Grim Reaper was creeping up from his blind spot. 4 deafening gunshots shattered the night. No warning, no robbery attempt, no demands. It was a brutal, point-blank execution. Just minutes later, a Mercedes SUV was hijacked on a foggy street. A young man named Danny Meng had a gun jammed into his head and was violently forced into the passenger seat. The man behind the wheel, Black Hat, now identified as Tamerlan Tsarnaev, turned to Danny with dead eyes and growled, "I did the Boston bombing. I just killed a cop." Trapped in the claustrophobic cabin, reeking of gunpowder and the cold sweat of his own terror, Danny counted every breath, knowing death was just a trigger pull away. However, a fatal misstep by the brothers at a gas station gave Danny a split-second window to kick the door open and sprint into the night. His frantic statement to the police not only provided the SUV's live GPS tracking, but also revealed a secret that made the FBI agent's blood run cold. Boston was just the warm-up. The next bombs were already primed, and they were speeding down the highway. Where was this hell ride actually headed? Chasing the blinking GPS signal like a ticking death clock, dozens of patrol cars tore through the night toward the quiet suburb of Watertown. 12:50 a.m. The moment they hit Laurel Street, the most ferocious shootout in local police history erupted. Cornered, the Tsarnaev brothers unleashed hell, blindly firing and hurling homemade pipe bombs and nail-packed pressure cookers at the barricade of police cruisers. The thick smell of sulfur choked the air, cutting through the deafening wail of sirens. Out of anger, Tamerlan, the older brother, decided to charge straight into the crossfire in a final suicidal stand, only to be tackled to the pavement by multiple officers. But the most chilling moment, the one that exposed the absolute zero of their empathy, happened seconds later. Seeing his brother pinned down, 19-year-old Dzhokhar, the kid with the angelic face, didn't hesitate. He slammed the gas pedal of the 2-ton Mercedes, roaring directly toward the huddle of officers. Dzhokhar ruthlessly ran over his own flesh and blood, dragging Tamerlan under the chassis just to clear a path for his escape into the pitch-black night. Leaving behind a trail of blood and a battered SUV, an agonizing question haunted the police force. How does a panicked and heavily bleeding teenager simply vanish into thin air right under the noses of hundreds of loaded weapons? The dawn of April 19th cast its light on a completely unrecognizable Boston. Instead of the usual morning rush, an eerie, spine-chilling silence blanketed the city. To prevent a second bloodbath, the governor issued a shelter-in-place order, an unprecedented mandate that turned a metropolis of millions into a literal ghost town. Public transit was paralyzed, storefronts were bolted shut, and residents huddled behind drawn curtains, holding their breath in pure terror. Out on the streets, the tension was dialed to the absolute max. Armored bearcats rumbled down the desolate asphalt. Thousands of heavily armed SWAT operators swept through block after block, kicking down doors, clearing every backyard and basement. The sweat poured down beneath heavy tactical gear. They tore Watertown apart for hours on end, yet Dzhokhar Tsarnaev seemed to have dissolved into the atmosphere. He was injured, on foot, yet perfectly invisible against the most advanced dragnet on Earth. As nightfall began to creep in once again, patience gave way to pure dread. Was the monster curled up inside the home of an innocent family right now, fingers wrapped around a detonator, waiting for the perfect moment to take everyone down with him? At exactly 6 p.m. on April 19th, authorities lifted the lockdown, believing the suspect might have already slipped through the net. David Henneberry, a Watertown resident, stepped out into his backyard, exhausted, just to get a breath of fresh air after 24 hours of suffocating confinement. Out of habit, his eyes drifted toward his dry-docked boat, the slipaway too. A tiny but jarring detail caught his eye. The shrink-wrap tarp covering the boat had been slashed, its straps fluttering loosely in the wind. With a sinking feeling in his gut, David grabbed a ladder, slowly climbed up, and peeked inside. His heart stopped. Trailing along the inner wall were smears of dark red blood. And down in the hull, amidst a mess of gear, a human figure lay curled up, barely breathing. Within minutes of his frantic 911 call, hundreds of SWAT rifles and FBI agents once again swarmed the property. This time, there was zero margin for error. A state police helicopter hovered above, locking its FLIR thermal camera onto the boat. On the command center's black and white monitor, a glowing white heat signature confirmed the target was alive. But what sent cold sweats down the snipers' necks was what that heat signature was doing. The suspect was tightly clutching an unknown object to his chest, constantly shifting. If it was a suicide vest, any breach attempt would instantly turn the entire neighborhood into a crater. A cold voice blasted through a bullhorn, demanding his surrender, but the only response was the howling wind. Behind that shredded tarp, backed into a corner, what final apocalyptic move was the monster plotting? Or the standoff shattered when police made their move. Flashbang grenades rained down into the yard, their blinding light and deafening cracks tearing through the darkness, sending up thick plumes of white smoke. Unable to endure the psychological and physical torment any longer, the torn tarp was shoved aside. Dzhokhar Tsarnaev, the 19-year-old mass murderer with the face of a college freshman, slowly stood up, raising both hands to the sky. He was covered in blood, weakened, and riddled with shrapnel from the night before. The final domino had fallen. The most expensive and bloody manhunt in American history was officially over. But the true chills hit the investigators only when they finally stepped onto the dry-docked boat. There were no rigged explosives. Instead, under the harsh glare of their flashlights, and a deeply sinister secret was laid bare on the fiberglass walls. In his final hours on the run, believing he was about to die, the killer had used a pencil and his own bleeding wounds to scrawl a deeply disturbing manifesto. The bloody, crude handwriting coldly justified the slaughter, dismissing the lives of the children and innocent people at the finish line as mere collateral damage in revenge for his radical ideologies. How does a kid raised in the American education system, with friends and a totally normal life, harbor a heart made of solid ice? And would a death sentence truly eradicate the seeds of terror still lurking in the minds of other fanatics? 2 years after the tragedy, the air inside the Boston Federal Courthouse was thick with righteous fury and unhealable trauma. Dozens of survivors dragged themselves to the witness stand, recounting the hell on earth through choked sobs and tears. Yet, in stark, sickening contrast to the heartbreak filling the room, Dzhokhar Tsarnaev sat cross-legged at the defense table. Not a single blink of remorse, not a shred of guilt. The young man's face was as hollow and cold as a block of ice. The outrage hit its boiling point when the prosecution played a clip from a holding cell security camera. Before his court appearance, instead of showing an ounce of repentance, Dzhokhar looked dead into the lens, threw up his middle finger, and flashed an arrogant, mocking smirk. The devil felt absolutely no remorse. On May 15th, 2015, he was sentenced to death. The city rallied around the chant, "Boston Strong," proud of the unbreakable unity that had ultimately defeated the terror. But deep down, the bombing shattered the illusion of urban safety forever, leaving behind a haunting question. How can you ever truly know that the person standing next to you in a crowded street isn't hiding a ticking time bomb in a perfectly harmless backpack? So, what are your thoughts on this verdict? Was Dzhokhar just a naive kid brainwashed by his older brother, or was the devil already living inside him all along? Let me know what you think down in the comments. If you want to join me in unpacking the darkest criminal files out there, don't forget to drop a like, hit subscribe, and ring that notification bell. Your support is what keeps us digging deeper into the minds of killers. Remember, the devil sometimes hides behind the most innocent face right next to us. Always keep your guard up, stay safe, and see you in the next case.